If you think traveling to foreign countries is just about taking photos and creating memories, wait until you hear what happened to Alex and April during what was supposed to be the trip of a lifetime. This story will make you question everything you thought you knew about tourist safety, and by the end, you'll understand why some places should never be visited alone. My name is Detective Sarah Mitchell, and I've been investigating missing persons cases for over 15 years. But nothing, and I mean nothing, could have prepared me for what I discovered when Alex and April's families contacted me about their children who had vanished without a trace in the heart of Russia. Alex Thompson, 28 years old, worked as a software engineer in Seattle. April Martinez, 26, was a graphic designer with an infectious laugh and an adventurous spirit that could light up any room. They had been dating for 3 years and had recently gotten engaged. Russia was supposed to be their celebration trip, a chance to experience something completely different before settling into married life. The couple had booked a 10-day cultural excursion through a company called Arctic Adventures, which specialized in off-the-beaten-path experiences in remote Russian territories. The tour promised authentic encounters with local communities, traditional Russian cuisine, and visits to historical sites that most tourists never get to see. But let me tell you something about promises made by tour companies that operate in some of the most isolated regions on Earth. Sometimes those promises become nightmares that families spend years trying to wake up from. Alex and April arrived in Moscow on February 14th, Valentine's Day. The irony wasn't lost on anyone when we later pieced together the timeline. They had planned this trip for months, researching Russian culture, learning basic phrases, and even taking a few Russian language classes online. April had filled 3 notebooks with places she wanted to visit, foods she wanted to try, and experiences she wanted to share with Alex. The tour group consisted of 12 people from different countries, 2 Germans, a British couple, 3 solo travelers from Canada, and Alex and April. Their guide was a man named Viktor Petrov, 45 years old, who had been working with Arctic Adventures for 7 years. Viktor spoke fluent English and had excellent reviews from previous tours. Everything seemed perfectly normal. For the first 4 days, everything went according to plan. The group visited the Hermitage Museum, took a train to St. Petersburg, and explored the magnificent palaces that once housed Russian royalty. Alex sent daily emails to his parents, describing the incredible architecture and April's excitement at seeing the Fabergé eggs in person. April posted photos on Instagram showing their adventures, always smiling, always excited about what they would discover next. But here's what I learned during my investigation. In missing persons cases, especially those involving foreign travel, the last moments of normalcy are often the most important clues. And in Alex and April's case, those moments were about to become crucial evidence. On February 18th, the tour group left St. Petersburg by bus for what Viktor described as the real adventure. They were heading to a remote region in northwestern Russia, near the Finnish border, where they would stay in a traditional Russian village and experience authentic rural life. The bus ride was supposed to take 8 hours, with stops at scenic viewpoints and local markets. April's last Instagram post was uploaded at 2:47 p.m. local time. The photo showed the Russian countryside through the bus window, with snow-covered forests stretching endlessly into the distance. Her caption read, "Into the unknown with my favorite person. Can't wait to see what adventures await us in this winter wonderland." That was the last communication anyone received from either Alex or April. The first sign something was wrong came from Alex's mother, Linda Thompson, who had been receiving daily check-in calls from her son throughout the trip. When Alex didn't call on February 19th, Linda initially thought it might be due to poor cell service in the remote area. But when February 20th passed without any communication, she became concerned. Linda contacted Arctic Adventures customer service, expecting to hear that the group was simply in an area with limited connectivity. Instead, she received a response that would haunt her for months. "We're currently investigating a communication breakdown with Tour Group 7. We'll provide updates as soon as we have more information." A communication breakdown. That's what they called it when a bus carrying 12 tourists and their guide seemingly vanished into the vast Russian wilderness. Meanwhile, April's sister, Maria Martinez, had been following April's social media posts religiously. When April didn't post anything new for 24 hours, Maria knew something was seriously wrong. April was obsessive about documenting her travels, often posting multiple times per day. The silence was completely out of character. Maria immediately contacted the American embassy in Moscow, but bureaucratic processes move slowly, especially when dealing with American citizens who had voluntarily entered remote areas of Russia. The embassy staff explained that it wasn't uncommon for tourists to lose communication while visiting rural regions, and they would begin making inquiries with local authorities. But as a former police officer, I can tell you that the first 48 hours in any missing persons case are critical. And in this case, those precious hours were slipping away while everyone assumed there was a reasonable explanation. The breakthrough came on February 22nd, when a Russian farmer named Ivan Volkov found the tour bus abandoned on a snow-covered road approximately 300 kilometers from the nearest town. The bus was unlocked, with personal belongings scattered throughout the interior. Luggage, cameras, passports, and cell phones were all left behind, but there was no sign of the 12 tourists or their guide. Local police were called to the scene, and what they discovered defied explanation. The bus showed no signs of mechanical failure. There were no signs of struggle inside the vehicle. The keys were still in the ignition, and the fuel tank was half full. It was as if 12 people had simply decided to walk away from their transportation and disappear into the Russian wilderness. But here's what bothered me most about the police report: the footprints. Despite the snow-covered ground, investigators found no clear trail leading away from the bus. There were some disturbed areas in the snow, but nothing that indicated a specific direction or suggested where the group might have gone. Even Volkov, the farmer who discovered the bus, later told authorities that he had seen unusual activity in the area over the previous few days. He reported seeing lights in the forest at night and hearing what sounded like vehicles moving through the woods. But in rural Russia, unusual activity could mean anything from illegal logging operations to military exercises. The Russian investigation officially began on February 23rd, but the remote location and harsh weather conditions made search efforts extremely difficult. The area where the bus was found was accessible only by a single dirt road that became impassable during winter storms. Search teams had to use snowmobiles and all-terrain vehicles to reach the location. As news of the disappearance spread, families of the missing tourists began arriving in Moscow, demanding answers. The German couple's relatives hired a private investigator. The British couple's family contacted their embassy, and Alex and April's families reached out to me, hoping that my experience with missing persons cases might provide some insight into what had happened to their children. I flew to Moscow on February 25th, and what I discovered during my investigation would challenge everything I thought I knew about organized crime, human trafficking, and the dark side of the tourism industry. My first stop was the Arctic Adventures office in Moscow. The company occupied a small space in a business district that had seen better days. The receptionist, a young woman named Anya, seemed genuinely distressed about the missing tour group. She explained that Viktor Petrov had been one of their most reliable guides, and nothing like this had ever happened before. But when I asked to speak with the company's owner, I was told he was unavailable for comment. When I pressed for more information about the tour's planned route and destinations, I was given vague responses and told that all details had been provided to the police. Something about their responses didn't sit right with me. In my experience, legitimate businesses are usually eager to cooperate with investigations, especially when their reputation is at stake. The evasiveness I encountered at Arctic Adventures suggested there might be more to this story than a simple case of tourists getting lost. I decided to investigate Viktor Petrov's background more thoroughly. What I discovered was disturbing. While Viktor had indeed worked as a tour guide for 7 years, he had no formal training or certification. His previous employment history included stints as a truck driver, warehouse worker, and security guard. There was nothing in his background that suggested he was qualified to lead tourists through remote wilderness areas. Even more concerning was what I learned about his financial situation. Viktor had been making regular deposits into his bank account that far exceeded what he should have been earning as a tour guide. The amounts were significant enough to suggest additional income sources, but there was no record of other employment. I also discovered that Viktor had been arrested twice in the past 5 years on charges related to smuggling. Though both cases had been dismissed due to lack of evidence, the pattern was becoming clear. Viktor Petrov was not just a tour guide. He was someone with connections to illegal activities, and the missing tourists might have unknowingly become part of something much more sinister. My investigation led me to a small town called Kovdor, about 50 kilometers from where the bus was discovered. Local residents told me that the area had been experiencing increased activity from organized crime groups involved in cross-border smuggling operations. The remote location and sparse population made it an ideal corridor for moving illegal goods between Russia and neighboring countries. One resident, an elderly woman named Svetlana, shared information that made my blood run cold. She told me that she had seen a group of foreign tourists being escorted through the town on the night of February 18th. The tourists appeared to be traveling on foot, and they were accompanied by several men she didn't recognize. What made her story particularly chilling was her description of the tourists' demeanor. They looked scared. Svetlana's account was corroborated by another resident who had witnessed similar activity. According to his testimony, the group had been taken to an abandoned industrial complex on the outskirts of town. The facility had been closed for over a decade, but locals had noticed lights and activity there in recent weeks. I immediately shared this information with Russian authorities, and a search team was dispatched to the abandoned complex. What they found there would become a crucial piece of evidence in understanding what had happened to Alex, April, and the other missing tourists. The industrial complex consisted of several deteriorating buildings that had once been used for processing timber. Most of the structures were barely standing, with broken windows and collapsed roofs. But one building showed signs of recent occupancy. Inside, investigators found evidence that people had been held there against their will. Makeshift sleeping areas, food wrappers, and most importantly, personal items belonging to the missing tourists. Among the items recovered were April's engagement ring, Alex's wallet, and a camera belonging to one of the German tourists. The camera's memory card contained photos from the early days of the tour, but the final images were disturbing. They showed the interior of the bus, but the lighting was dim and the photos appeared to have been taken hurriedly. In the background of one image, you could make out what appeared to be armed men. The discovery at the industrial complex transformed the investigation from a missing persons case into a potential kidnapping and human trafficking operation. Russian authorities expanded their search and began investigating known criminal networks in the region. But here's what happened next that would change everything we thought we knew about this case. On March 3rd, 2 weeks after the tourists had disappeared, a woman stumbled into a hospital in Murmansk, a city about 400 kilometers from where the bus was found. She was suffering from severe hypothermia and frostbite, and she was barely conscious when medical staff found her. But when she finally regained the ability to speak, she identified herself as April Martinez. April's survival was nothing short of miraculous. She had somehow escaped from her captors and had spent days walking through the frozen wilderness, surviving on snow and whatever shelter she could find. Her physical condition was critical, but she was alive, and she had a story to tell that would expose the truth about what had happened to the tour group. According to April's account, the tour bus had been stopped by armed men who claimed to be conducting a security checkpoint. Victor, their guide, had seemed to know the men and had encouraged the tourists to cooperate. The group was then transferred to vehicles and taken to the abandoned industrial complex, where they were held prisoner. April described their captors as part of a criminal organization that specialized in human trafficking. The tourists had been selected because they were foreigners who had paid cash for their tour and whose disappearance might not immediately raise suspicions. The plan was to transport them across the border and sell them to buyers in other countries. But April's escape had disrupted their operation. When the traffickers realized she was missing, they had panicked and moved the other prisoners to a different location. April had no idea where Alex and the other tourists had been taken, but she provided detailed descriptions of their captors and information about the organization's structure. Russian authorities used April's testimony to launch a massive manhunt. They raided several locations connected to the trafficking network and arrested numerous suspects. Among those arrested was Viktor Petrov, who had been found hiding in a safe house in St. Petersburg. Under interrogation, Viktor revealed the full scope of the operation. Arctic Adventures had been a front for the RU trafficking ring, specifically targeting foreign tourists who were unlikely to be missed immediately. The company's legitimate tours provided cover for their illegal activities, and Victor had been recruiting suitable victims for over 2 years. The investigation revealed that at least 30 tourists had disappeared during Arctic Adventures tours over the past 3 years. Most had been reported as accidents or cases of tourists getting lost in remote areas. The systematic nature of the operation was horrifying, and April's escape had likely saved countless future victims. But the question remained, where was Alex? Where were the other 10 tourists from their group? The breakthrough came when one of the arrested traffickers, facing life in prison, agreed to cooperate with authorities. He led investigators to a remote compound near the Norwegian border, where they discovered a horrifying scene. The facility was being used as a staging area for transporting victims across international borders. 9 of the missing tourists were found alive in the compound, though they were in poor physical and psychological condition. They had been held prisoner for 2 weeks, living in brutal conditions while their captors prepared to move them to buyers in other countries. Among the survivors was Alex Thompson. The reunion between Alex and April was emotional beyond description. Both had endured unimaginable trauma, but they had survived. They had faced the worst of human nature and had somehow found the strength to continue fighting for their lives. But the story doesn't end there. 2 of the tourists from their group were never found. Authorities believe they were killed during the early stages of the operation, possibly as examples to keep the other prisoners compliant. Their bodies were never recovered, and their families continue to seek answers about what happened to their loved ones. The investigation into Arctic adventures and the trafficking network continued for months. Authorities discovered that the operation had connections to similar criminal organizations across Eastern Europe. The case led to the arrest of over 50 people and the dismantling of one of the region's most sophisticated human trafficking rings. Viktor Petrov was sentenced to life in prison for his role in the operation. The owners of Arctic Adventures were also arrested and charged with multiple counts of kidnapping, human trafficking, and fraud. The company was shut down permanently, and its assets were seized to provide compensation to victims and their families. For Alex and April, the physical recovery was just the beginning. Both required extensive medical treatment for injuries sustained during their captivity. The psychological trauma would take much longer to heal. They underwent months of therapy and counseling, learning to cope with the nightmares and anxiety that followed their ordeal. But perhaps the most remarkable aspect of their story is how they chose to use their experience to help others. Alex and April became advocates for tourist safety, working with travel organizations to improve screening processes for tour companies and educate travelers about potential risks. They established a foundation called Safe Travels International, which provides resources for tourists visiting foreign countries and supports families of missing persons. Their work has helped prevent other travelers from falling victim to similar schemes and has provided assistance to families dealing with the disappearance of loved ones abroad. April often speaks about the moment she decided to escape from their captors. She knew that staying would likely mean death, but she also knew that her survival might be the only chance for the other prisoners to be rescued. Her courage in making that desperate journey through the frozen wilderness not only saved her own life but also led to the rescue of 9 other people. Alex describes their experience as a testament to the strength of the human spirit. Despite facing unimaginable circumstances, they found ways to support each other and maintain hope. Their relationship, tested by the most extreme circumstances possible, emerged stronger than ever. The couple married in a small ceremony 6 months after their rescue, surrounded by family and friends who had feared they would never see them again. Their wedding was a celebration not just of their love, but of their survival and their commitment to helping others avoid similar tragedies. The case of Alex and April's disappearance in Russia serves as a stark reminder of the dangers that can lurk behind legitimate-seeming travel opportunities. It highlights the importance of thoroughly researching tour companies, staying in communication with family and friends while traveling, and trusting your instincts when something doesn't feel right. But it also demonstrates the incredible resilience of the human spirit and the power of hope in the darkest circumstances. Alex and April's story could have ended in tragedy, but instead, it became a tale of survival, courage, and the determination to turn a traumatic experience into a force for positive change. Today, Alex and April continue their advocacy work while building a new life together. They travel regularly, but they do so with a deep understanding of the risks involved and a commitment to helping others travel safely. Their foundation has helped rescue several trafficking victims and has provided support to dozens of families dealing with missing persons cases. The abandoned industrial complex where they were held prisoner has been demolished, but the memory of what happened there continues to drive their work. They refuse to let their traumatic experience define them, instead choosing to use it as motivation to protect other travelers and fight against human trafficking. Their story serves as both a warning and an inspiration. It reminds us that evil exists in the world, but it also shows us that good people can overcome even the most horrific circumstances. Alex and April's survival and their subsequent advocacy work have made the world a slightly safer place for travelers, and their courage continues to inspire others to speak out against injustice. As I reflect on this case, I'm struck by how quickly a dream vacation can become a nightmare, but also by how human resilience can triumph over the darkest circumstances. Alex and April's story is one that will stay with me forever, not just because of the horror they endured, but because of the strength they showed in surviving and the compassion they've demonstrated in helping others. The case remains a landmark in international law enforcement cooperation and has led to significant improvements in How authorities investigate missing persons cases involving foreign tourists. The lessons learned from this investigation continue to save lives and bring traffickers to justice. But perhaps the most important lesson from Alex and April's story is that even in our darkest moments, we have the power to choose hope over despair, courage over fear, and love over hatred. Their survival and their commitment to helping others prove that the human spirit is stronger than any evil it might face. Note, this story is entirely fictional. Any resemblance to real people, places, or events is purely coincidental.